First, good morning, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen and distinguished participants, thank you for joining me today for this important session on conflict dynamics and risk of proliferation of weapon of mass destruction and delivery systems in the Middle East. I'm Chen Zak Kane. I'm the project director of the Middle East Weapon of Mass Destruction Free Zone at UNIDIR. And it will be an exaggeration to say that the Middle East we are discussing today vastly differs from the one just over a year ago. With the beginning of the October 7 Hamas attack and the interim war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, the conflict has been further complicated by the involvement by other regional actors, including Hezbollah, the Houthis, as well as the Israeli and Iranian counterattacks against each other. As a result, we have been on the edge of a broader regional war for almost a year. These escalating dynamics are unfolding against the backdrop of a broader regional transformation. The Middle East is experiencing shifting fault lines, with new political and military alignment taking shapes, and some also noted novel regional processes emerging, such as the rapprochement diplomatic agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. The very geopolitical fabric of the region is changing before our eyes. The Middle East remains the only region that also these developments are taking place along some of critical threats related to weapon of mass destructions that we have been carrying for many years. Some of them old, some of them are relatively new. The Middle East remains the only region where we have states that not only possess weapons of mass destruction, but also states that openly threaten to develop and use them. We are witnessing non-compliance with non-proliferation obligations and the presence of non-state actors who have acquired and use weapons of mass destruction. These existing weapon of mass destruction threats are exacerbated by the evolving security environment, where conventional as well as nuclear deterrence are becoming increasingly central to the strategy of many Middle Eastern states. Globally, the war in Ukraine, the challenges to the non-proliferation regimes that we have been experiencing for almost a decade now, a second Trump presidency, the advent of emerging technology that we are witnessing, as well as the competition between US, China, and Russia, of regional and local manifestations. The Middle East is not immune from those global shifts. Rather, it's often a stage where there are those broader tensions play out in localized and with highly consequential ways. The current volatile security environment on both global and regional levels shapes regional states' proliferation and non-proliferation decision-making regarding weapon of mass destructions. This environment also impacts the prospect of the Middle East Weapon of Mass Destruction Free Zone Initiative, which will mark its 5-session conference this November. So given these really rapidly changing and interconnected challenges, I'm truly delighted to have 4 distinguished colleagues here with me today who will help us explore how the evolving global and regional dynamics are shaping the threat perception and security calculations of Middle Eastern states, how these factors influence their strategy around weapon of mass destruction proliferation, as well as non-proliferation policies, and what concrete steps can realistically be taken to mitigate the risk of weapon of mass destruction in the region. So with that, I will now introduce our speakers in the order they will present. I will start with our first speaker, which is Ambassador Stéphane Clement, who is the Special Envoy for Non-Proliferation and Disarmament in the European External Action Service. Ambassador Clement was appointed as the Special Envoy in February 2024, and prior to that, he served as the head of the EU delegation to the International Organization in Vienna. Since 2016, Ambassador Clement has also served as the Special Advisor to the Iranian nuclear issue and the European External Action Service. Prior to this, Ambassador Clement held many distinguished and important positions. But with that, and all of you have the bio, so I will not explore all of them, but with that, Ambassador Clement, the floor is yours.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Chen, for introducing me and for giving the framework a bit about the subjects we are expected to address here today. And as you rightly pointed out, the situation today in the Middle East is very different from 1 year ago. What you did not say so much, that it's rather more negative than 1 year ago, so I think I would like to add this. My objective, and you kindly point to my biography, which is in a simplified way, I did only one thing. I did the Iran nuclear negotiations, so I will very much look at the Iran angle in my presentation, and I'm fully aware that also later on my colleague from Tehran will for sure complement on this. But if we look at the Middle East as such in the last few years, we see, of course, an acceleration of proliferation, and this is on the one hand, if you see the importance of use of development of missiles, ballistic missiles, but also other aerial assets, if I may call it this way, and then in addition, of course, the nuclear component has become far more, how to say, challenging and far more urgent with the unfortunate fate of the Iran nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which is in a certain way more and more fading away and entering into more troubled and a situation where maybe beyond possibilities for recovery. And underlying this, of course, is the development of the Iranian nuclear program, which goes back for many decades. And there was a concerted efforts over, I would say, at least since 2004 to better monitor and restrict the Iranian nuclear program. As you know, the European Union has been in the forefront of this exercise by developing what is called the dual-track policy. Dual-track meant at the time there should be on the one hand pressure on Iran, including sanctions, but also incentives. And this incentive and pressure combination culminated in 2015 in the JCPOA, and then, of course, as we know, the first Trump administration withdrew from the agreement, and it was not possible, in spite of all the efforts during the year 2021-22, to recover. Meanwhile, the Iranian nuclear program has evolved far beyond all even imaginable limits under the JCPOA. And just to give a few, I don't want to be too quantitatively precise here, a few key figures. If you look at the stockpile of enriched material, even up to the level of 60%, the overall stockpile is maybe 10 times higher or 20 times higher than what is foreseen in the JCPOA. This may be not yet the most concerning element, but there's the development of enrichment technology, centrifuge technology. Today's holding in Iran of advanced centrifuges maybe 100 times more than it was under the JCPOA. And as you can imagine, even in case of some negotiating track, many people, of course, would like to see some perspective, some efforts to return to a negotiated diplomatic track. But irrespective of the overall political situation, which is not very conducive, I think from a technical perspective already, there's a very, very massive obstacle to any kind of technical limitations. This is the link to the IEA, of course, and IEA has lost, due to Iranian restrictions on the IEA's activities in Iran, has lost a lot of knowledge. What is called in technical terms the continuity of knowledge has been lost, and this, even in case of an agreement, is really very difficult, maybe impossible, to recover the full picture of the Iranian nuclear program. And of course, as you can imagine, the more the program is developed to a certain level, the more important it is to have very strict and reliable monitoring on this. So we all know that the Director General of the IEA, Rafael Grossi, is very much dedicated to do his best. It's well known that he's even these days traveling to Iran to see whether something can be done to address some of the so-called outstanding questions, and also to see if there could be some additional transparency measures as a positive sign from Iran. We shall see. I don't want to preempt the future. Of course, the outcome of the US election, the return of the Trump administration, will not facilitate his exercise and the overall exercise. But looking at other things, of course, we see in general in the Middle East a trend to develop nuclear programs. Most of them, they would qualify as nuclear energy programs. We have in the Emirates, we have in Egypt, we have in Turkey, we have also maybe some ideas in Saudi Arabia and Jordan. What is missing, I think, in the Middle East, and here I would like maybe to inject some creative thought, is something which was the case when, after the Second World War in Europe, was created what is Euratom, the European Atomic Energy Community, which was kind of an effort. And of course, I'm fully aware you cannot compare the Middle East to to Europe after the Second World War, although maybe the atmosphere, the tensions were not so unsimilar to what we see in the Middle East today, where still a war is going on. I think it's maybe one positive opportunity that we see in the past few years from the countries of the region. There is an effort to build better relations. We see this kind of from the Gulf countries and Iran, and this maybe at some point allow for to be some very positive breeding ground for some common effort to develop some common assets in nuclear energy, nuclear application, maybe in modern high-tech. Yesterday, if you went to the plenary meetings, a lot of us discussion about emerging technologies, artificial intelligence. We have already some international agency for renewable energies in the Gulf region. Maybe this is the moment for the Gulf region and Iran to come forward with some common endeavor. Of course, I'm fully aware that the outcome of the US election has made this maybe more difficult. What is my, on a personal basis, my prediction of what we will see now? Will, of course, it's quite obvious that if we look at the second Trump administration, not much is known, but we will most likely see an effort to reestablish the maximum pressure policy. This will be far more complicated in the current geopolitical context than it was in 2015, 16, 17, when, of course, we have a war of aggression ongoing by Russia, which brings Iran closer to Russia. We have China basically as one of the key economic partners now of Iran. So this will be far more difficult to reduce the Iranian trade in crude oil. I think there's also, of course, the possibility to see some effort to negotiate. As you know, the European Union has still a formal role in the JCPOA. According to Security Council Resolution 2231, we are the coordinator of the Joint Commission. In this function, we are in touch with all so-called participants and former participants, which is the United States. This resolution will expire in October 2025. It is not clear beyond if there will be any successor mechanism. There's also the risk of, as you know, so-called snapback. The JCPOA foresees that in case Iran is in significant non-performance, one participant or more could ask for a snapback of the sanctions. Of course, this kind of stalemate in potential negotiations puts this risk at a much higher level. It is clearly that it's more likely to see more escalation, but I would not totally discard that, or maybe even make an encouragement to countries and authorities in the region to see if some kind of mechanism could be established to build confidence, to develop some common activities. The EU has been trying in the region to, obviously we support the importance of a WMD-free zone in the region, which is more a long-term project, but we've been trying also to develop some common efforts in the area of nuclear safety and security, which should be in everybody's interest, and emergency preparedness. We did not see the full buy-in yet from the region as such, maybe from individual countries. So I think this is maybe a message I want to end with. The situation is very, very concerning. It's not looking very good or optimistic, but there is a chance for the region to make an effort maybe and to contribute to de-escalation and to smoothing tension. I will stop it here, but I'm looking forward to questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Clement, for both being realistic but also optimistic and finding some ideas to going forward. With that, we will turn to our second speaker, Ambassador Karim Haggag, who serves as a professor for practice at American University of Cairo. Ambassador Haggag is career Egyptian diplomat with over 25 years service in Egyptian diplomatic corps. He is currently senior advisor in Linux, strategic business advisor, Egypt leading government relations and public policy consultancy. He's also professor of practice and at the School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the American University in Cairo, and non-resident fellow at the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Through his diplomatic career, Ambassador Haggag has focused on Middle East regional security, arms control, non-proliferation, and Arab-Israeli diplomacy. In addition to his diplomatic assignment, he also was a visiting professor at Near East and South Asia Center for Strategic Studies and the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. Karim, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chen. I'd like to start actually where you left off with your very pertinent reference to the reality that today's Middle East is very different than where the region was a year ago. I think that is the point of departure that we should take. And I'll say a few words about where we might go from here. But I think it's also important to maybe step back and look at not just discontinuities, what has changed, but also continuing trends, because those trends are a very big part of how the region got to the point at which it is now. And here I would like to point to 4 trends that have been ongoing for the last 2 or 3 decades that together are converging to produce what I would describe as the creeping nuclearization of the Middle East. The first trend, and Stefan alluded to this, is this situation of entrenched nuclear latency that is now characterizing Iran's nuclear program. I think you described it very well. The advancements made in Iran's nuclear program has made Iran very much a threshold nuclear state, and that was the result of the steps undertaken after 2018 when the United States pulled out of the JCPOA. I think the significance of this is that the more it becomes entrenched, the more the reality of Iran as a threshold nuclear state is established. I think that will create very long shadows over the non-proliferation picture in the Middle East as we move forward. So that I think is a very milestone development when we talk about the proliferation landscape for the region. And that leads to the second dominant trend, which is what we are seeing in terms of emerging signs of nuclear hedging. And here, the big part of that story is Saudi Arabia's emerging nuclear position with respect to its civil nuclear program. And of course, the interesting point here is how Saudi Arabia frames the purpose of its nuclear program. So obviously talking about the need to generate nuclear power from the peaceful nuclear program, but also an insistence on maintaining full control of the nuclear fuel cycle, having the right to establish an enrichment capability on Saudi Arabian soil. Now, of course, it's important to point out that Saudi Arabia's nuclear program is very much in its infancy, but perhaps this is the one example whereby Saudi Arabia frames its program in terms of hedging vis-a-vis Iran. So a desire to catch up or hedge against Iran's nuclear capability. Third trend is, I think, a very troubling sign of the nuclearization of deterrence relationships in the region. So with the collapse of the JCPOA, deterrence has replaced diplomacy. The United States has adopted an overt deterrence posture against Iran, and it is that posture that is meant to prevent Iran from crossing the nuclear threshold towards full military nuclear capability. Iran has responded to that trend by invoking what many have referred to as a virtual nuclear deterrence posture. So, arguing that if Iran is subject to attack or an existential threat, it will pull out from the Non-Proliferation Treaty, take its nuclear program underground, and reassess its entire nuclear posture. So using its entrenched nuclear status as leverage to invoke this type of virtual nuclear deterrence without actually possessing actual military nuclear capability. The fourth trend, which is one that is not talked about very much because it's not very much in the public domain, goes back to Israel. Israel, of course, is the first proliferator in the Middle East. It was the first country outside of the P5 to acquire a military nuclear capability. But what we've seen with Israel's nuclear program over the last 3 or 4 decades, depending on the few public reporting that is out there, is a trend towards vertical nuclear proliferation. So advancements in Israel's nuclear program with respect to things like warhead designs, the diversity and range of means of delivery, the development of a second strike capability, the acquisition of a nuclear submarine force, the hardening of Israel's nuclear infrastructure. So it's a trend that's lurking in the background there that is also a very important part of the overall landscape we see in the Middle East. These trends are converging to create this overarching direction towards what I would describe as the creeping nuclearization of the region. So that's a situation that combines nuclear latency with nuclear hedging, the nuclearization of deterrence postures in the region, and this last trend of vertical nuclear proliferation. Where does that leave us today? So, of course, all of these trends have intersected in a very big way with the recent conflict that has been undergoing since the war in Gaza that broke out on October 7th of last year. So I think the important development there is that as a result of the military outcomes of that conflict, we have a situation of heightened vulnerabilities for all of the actors in the region. Of course, Israel was in a very heightened state of vulnerability directly after October 7th. Iran, because of the outcomes of the recent Israeli attacks, especially on Hezbollah and the reciprocal attacks between Israel and Iran directly for the first time, have left Iran in a very vulnerable situation. And that is the result of the loss of its first line of defense with respect to Hezbollah in Lebanon, but also the increasing exposure of the weakness of Iran's conventional nuclear capabilities vis-a-vis Israel. Perhaps that is what explains these increasing references that are more and more frequent on the part of Iranian officials that they will reassess their nuclear posture if they feel that they are in a state of heightened vulnerability. So again, going back to the invocation of exercising their Article 10 rights under the NPT, pulling out from the treaty and reassessing their nuclear posture. That leaves us with two possibilities moving forward. The first is that we may have a proliferation crisis, an immediate crisis with respect to Iran's nuclear program, especially with respect to this option of reassessing its posture within the NPT. That will likely be triggered or could be triggered by what we can expect to be a very hardline posture from the incoming Trump administration, a return to the policy of maximum pressure against Iran that will only heighten the sense of vulnerability that I alluded to a moment ago. That could be coupled with indications of weaponization, and that, of course, will be not just a regional crisis, but it will precipitate a global crisis. So this will be the second instance of a defection from the NPT, which will have major implications for the global non-proliferation regime. The second possibility is a move towards negotiations. And President Trump and certain elements of the Iranian leadership have actually indicated their desire to consider a return to negotiations. What a new negotiations process might look like, will it be the JCPOA? Will it be a JCPOA plus, meaning something that includes missiles, something that has a regional security component dealing with Iran's overall regional posture, involving proxies, involving arrangements in certain arenas of conflicts, so ceasefires in Lebanon, ceasefires in Yemen, all of that, I think, remains to be seen. I think as a final thought, this is a moment where we need to reconsider, I think, approaches that have become normalized for the last 10 to 20 years. And here I would just pivot off what you said about the Middle East is not Europe. I agree, although it's a nice thought. But I think we need something much more than the prospect of cooperation between civil nuclear programs. I think we need a serious arms control process for the Middle East. An arms control process that is inclusive, that is comprehensive, that is rooted in this idea of establishing a zone free of all weapons of mass destruction, so all categories of WMDs for the region. And that was the original intent and philosophy behind the zone idea. And I think it's urgent to begin considering this prospect seriously and investing in this prospect seriously, because ad hoc approaches don't work. The JCPOA was an ad hoc process. And what those ad hoc processes do is if we deal with the Iran problem on its own, or the Iraq problem on its own, or the Syrian problem on its own, all that does is reinforce asymmetries, military asymmetries in the region. We need a comprehensive process for the region to create confidence, to lower the level of arms on a region-wide basis, and to move back, hopefully reverse this process of creeping nuclearization. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Karim. With regard to, now we will turn to our third speaker, Dr. Syed Hamza Savavi, who serves as the director of the Institute for Islamic World Future Studies in Tehran. Dr. Savavi is also members of the Faculty of Law and Political Science of the University of Tehran, the director of Regional Studies Department of Tehran University, and the editor-in-chief of the Scientific Journal of Fundamentals and Applied Studies in the Islamic World. Dr. Hamza Savavi's academic activities are mainly focused on Iran foreign policy and security crisis in the Middle East region, including authoring a book on the geopolitical crisis of the Middle East and its prospects for the 2035 horizons. Previously, Dr. Savavi served as the manager of the Neighborhood Policy for the Islamic Republic of Iran project commissioned by the Iranian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Dr. Savavi, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you for inviting me here. I think you will agree that the Middle East region has never been close to a massive war in the last 50 years. In fact, conflict is between two main actors, Iran and Israel. If we want to describe the current situation from the point of view of game theory, we must say that the game of chicken between Iran and Israel is being implemented. As you know, the game of chicken refers to a conflict where two drivers drive towards each other at high speed. One must move out of the way or both will collide and be killed. In the case that one of the drivers get out of the way, that driver is the loser, and he called chicken for being a coward, and the driver who remain on the track is declared the winner. This term is very common in political and economic sciences. Both Iranian and Israeli actors want to be the brave winner of this game and make the other a loser. Maybe not knowing that there is a situation where two cars may collide and both drivers are killed. It seems that cognitive biases have been formed on the level of the actors on both sides, which can make the situation of severe confrontation possible. The first point is that there are elites on both sides who interpret the current situation as apocalyptic and believes that this conflict is what was promised to them in the scriptures and holy papers. The problem with this view is that it is reasonable to take any amount of damage because we are on the way to a great victory, which is promised by God. The second point is that each side is on a verge of collapse from the within by its own people and has counted on these issues. The problem with this view is that it is true that both sides are facing internal problems, but it does not necessarily mean the fall of the political system. The third point is that overconfidence in one's ability and lack of information of the hidden ability of other side. And the last point is that both sides think that in the event of the full-scale war, they have ability to control its scope and end the war. Okay, but what we should do? What is the suggestion? In fact, the root of the problem goes back to the solving the problem of the Palestinian and Israel. Until it is not solved, the conflict between Iran and Israel will continue. I think both should be pressured by the international community to accept a two-state solution in a fair way, or one state with equal citizenship rights, a secular government which is not based on tribe or race or religion. Thank you to hear me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Savadi, for broadening the conversation beyond only weapon of mass destruction to how we can go forward with some diplomatic solutions as well. With that, I think our fourth speaker is still not in the room. Okay, so with that, let's start with questions. I think at least I have many questions that can be asked. I will take the prerogative to at least ask one question each of our panelists, but then let's go and we will open it to our audience. So, given given the past week results of U.S. election and the latest news over the past 24 hours regarding what I found relatively surprising Trump administration first week nominations that already include a special envoy to the Middle East as well as a new ambassador to Israel. So Stefan, and how do you see really that election results influencing EU diplomacy vis-a-vis Iran and other non-proliferation regional challenges, especially taking note that when the U.S. withdrew from the JCPOA, one of the Iranian main complaints was that Europe did not step up and fill the U.S. gap related to sanctions. So where do you see any role of EU diplomacy in that? Karim, for you, how do you think those will influence Egypt as well as other states' non-proliferation calculations with regard to U.S. either being more involved in the region or less involved in the region? And Dr. Zavavi, how do you see them influencing Iran nuclear calculus? On one end, as Karim noted, both sides have been indicating that they have interest to negotiate a conflict, some other rework the JCPOA. On the other end, we also see, we know that the Trump administration made other statements with regard to Iran. So with that, let's start with you, Dr. Zaradi, and we'll go backwards with the order.
So it's complicated issues because when we talk about Iran, there is a lot of consideration. And it is not easy as, okay, I said that I'm ready to negotiate, and Iran said that, no, I'm agree. No, it doesn't work. And maybe Mr. Trump and his administration in previous time, they didn't consider about the situation of Iran. And they made a maximum pressure strategy which was not successful because after that, Iran continued and make more help to the proxies around the region. And you know what happened after the maximum pressure strategies, which is called the failure strategy by Mr. Biden's after Mr. Trump. What should we do now? My question is that it's very hard to start negotiation between Iran and Mr. Trump's administration because Mr. Trump is officially the killer of the Iranian high-rank officials, Qasem Soleimani. And it's hard from the Iranian side to start negotiation with the killer of the Qasem Soleimani. But what should we can do? I think the whole region, Middle East region, suffers from lack of security system, which is necessary, some kind of regional security system, especially between Iran and the Arab countries in the region. If Iran and Arab countries can establish a kind of mechanism for security, maybe it's possible indirectly consider the consternation from the USA side in this mechanism indirectly via the Arab countries, and the settlement of this mechanism can be lead to some kind of peace in the region. Is it possible? Do you understand what I mentioned?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's interesting and indicating also another trends that I don't know if we mentioned here previously, that Iran concentrates on the regional aspect much more in the last 3-4 years than only US in the region.
Yeah,
And that's something I think that,
Yeah.
again, going with your comments and observation how to go forward. Kareem.
How do countries in the region relate to an incoming Trump administration? I think I think with great difficulty. I think that's the short answer. There seem to be two tendencies within Trump world, as it were, that are somewhat contradictory. The first trend is the isolationist wing within the Republican Party. That is very much centered around figures like the vice president-elect, J.D. Vance, and also Trump himself. So this is a very non-interventionist approach when it comes to international affairs in general and military affairs in particular, especially when it comes to the Middle East. I mean, going back to what Trump said during his first administration, he sees very little value of initiating new wars in the Middle East. The other trend is the old, new neocon wing that is centered around figures like Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State designate, others who are not given cabinet positions like Lindsey Graham from the United States Senate, very influential figure when it comes to Trump. These are very interventionist individuals, going for agendas like maximum pressure, invoking the threat of military force to deal with security threats and so on. Which one will be dominant is hard to say. But I think it's important to maybe flip the question around. It's not so much what a Trump administration will do, but the reality it confronts once it is in office. And the reality it will confront is the prospect of a full-fledged armed conflict in the region, ongoing wars in Gaza, in Lebanon, and the prospect of a tipping point that maybe pushes Iran beyond the threshold towards nuclear acquisition. And it's still, I think, early days to assess what a Trump administration will do. I think what countries in the region need to do, including and in particular Egypt, is try and pull back immediately from the brink. So a ceasefire in Gaza, a ceasefire in Lebanon, some deconfliction, immediate deconfliction between Iran and Israel, and maybe the hinting, and there are indications of this from Trump, that he is not on board with a preemptive military attack on Iranian facilities or Iranian oil infrastructure. So pulling back from the brink, that is the immediate imperative. The proliferation aspect we will have to get to. And here I go back again to the urgency of investing in a diplomatic process for arms control in the Middle East. I think if the region crosses into this very dangerous territory of nuclearization, and we're left with the prospect of no framework for arms control, that I think is a very dangerous condition for the Middle East to be in.
Thank you. And I think your question of what they will do, going back to the first Trump administration, one of the questions is what they will not do. And those are going hand in hand, especially if the emphasis is going to be on China and Indo-Pacific rather than the Middle East. And then the question is, are they going to try to solve some of the conflict in the region really fast to go to what they're trying to really address, which is Indo-Pacific, or not and be drawn again to the Middle East? Right. And so obviously all of us will watch and see how that's fold out. Stefan.
Thank you, and I interpret your question a bit was more on EU-Iran relations and what kind of the EU could play. You also asked the question about looking backward. It's indeed correct that when the US withdrew in 2018, there was an effort by E3, but also by China and Russia at the time to stabilize the JCPOA. But in a nutshell, many efforts were undertaken in terms of EU programs, but also we had the INSTEX, the trade exchange mechanism. All these efforts, unfortunately, did not work against the background of secondary US sanctions, which were far too intrusive and powerful. As to EU-Iran relations, I mean, first of all, I have to say, while it's not so much on the radar screen, also in the EU, we have a transition at the moment. We will have a new commission, a new high representative coming in, so this will be more or less coincide with the new US administration. So everything I say now, of course, has to be cross-checked with the decisions and perspective and initiatives taken by the new leadership. But what can be asserted absolutely certainly is that the EU-Iran relations have become far more complicated since 2004 when the EU involvement in the nuclear question started. At that time, it was still possible to, in a certain way, compartmentalize and to separate the nuclear issue from all the other issues. Nowadays, this is far more complicated. We have the support of Iran, the military support of Iran to Russia in the missile field, which is taken very seriously and has clearly crossed an EU red line. We have many, many disagreements with Iran on human rights, on EU citizens detained in Iran. Of course, Iran's role in the region has become more assertive. This will for sure would make it more complicated for the EU to play a role. As I said earlier, the EU has still this formal function under Security Council Resolution 2231. We are in contact with Iranian authorities. If you want me to speculate about how a US administration, in particular Trump II administration, will position itself towards the role of the EU in the Iran nuclear context, I think this is very difficult to answer. I think Trump administrations have a history of being very unpredictable, so I will not go into this. What is for sure that, and I think it was pointed out by my Iranian colleague, it is not so easy to have a direct contact between Iran and the US, and often there is this kind of misunderstanding. If once there is direct contact with Iran and the US, situations improve. It can get much worse. So I think the EU has a role, or could have a very important role here as a mediator and as kind of a intermediary in such a process, even if what I said before still would limit the very much strained relations of Iran and the EU, and I don't think this can be solved so easily, but it's not necessarily that this has to continue if we see a different geopolitical perspective and dynamics. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. So now we'll open it to Q&A. I have, the left side is very active. Let me take 3 questions at a time. Please introduce yourself, your name, where you're from, and if you have a specific question to one of the speakers, please note that. So let me start from, I think Jean-Pascal was first, and then both of you, and then we'll go back. Jean-Pascal, and then we will go through everyone else.
Thank you very much. I'm Jean-Pascal Zanders. I'm Belgian, head the trench, busy with chemical and biological weapons. I'm very interested in the Middle East. And thank you for your interventions. It was a really good start to the day. My question goes specifically to Professor Hagek and linked to the zone exempt from non-conventional weapons for the MENA region in particular. So since we are talking about the elimination of different weapon categories, we also have to realize that each category functions under a different legal regime today. Particularly chemical biological weapons are disarmament treaties going to zero for everybody. But even between those two treaties, there are differences. So if I look at chemical and biological weapons, my first question is, why is it that the states in the MENA region don't seem to think that the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention and the Chemical Weapons Convention are sufficient for joining for reaching the objectives of the zone exempt of non-conventional weapons? And related to that, why is it that the countries in the region do not pressure for each treaty the two holdout states not to join those treaties? The second question, kind of related to that, is the whole initiative regarding to the zone has originated with the NPT review conferences, which means that the reporting from the current conference sessions that are happening goes back to the NPT. Why is there no reach out to the CWC community, the BTWC community, and see how they actually might be bring fresh ideas or solutions to the region? Thank you.
Thank you, Erzsébet Rózsa from Hungary. I have one question to Karim and one question to Dr. Safavi. Karim, we have seen several proposals with regard to some regional concepts. Mohammed Shaker was mentioning it in several conferences, but we could also mention the proposal for a 2012 Middle East conference that was facilitated by Yakulayeva. We all know it has come nothing. My question is that the idea is there, proposals have been there, but it was always the political will that was lacking. How can you convince all the most important and all the regional partners to participate in such a proposal? And here, namely, if we come back to the 2012, first, Iran didn't agree to participate in it, but when they heard that Israel is rejecting the idea, the Iranians expressed their will to participate in such a conference. So how could you convince the political will, which is always the beginning point of any arms control and disarmament issue? And then a very, I'm sorry, provocative question to Dr. Safavi, which increasingly we have heard and we are hearing from Iranian politicians. When you say the two-state solution, you know what that means. That means the acknowledgement of Israel on the other side of the 1967 borders. And I remember that already President Khatami said that if the Palestinians come to an agreement, then we accept it, and so on and so forth. So in fact, it has been around, but it has never been such openly said that maybe as you presented and as we hear nowadays. Thank you.
Thank you. If we can have two more, given the amount of people that have questions.
Thank you. A very interesting situation, and I think on one hand we have this creeping proliferation, risk of large-scale war and U.S. isolation. On the other hand, we have the NPT and its survival and the nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East. When we deal with this Iran-US relationship, I think this is wrong in this situation. One should look at the American isolation on the one hand, and then in these situations, the region takes initiative itself. And my question is actually that there is political will today between Saudi Arabia and Iran. The Iranian foreign minister has visited firstly Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia MBS has just stated that we want to be closer to Iran. So, and I will be talking more about this afternoon, but why not a negotiation between Saudi Arabia and Iran, maybe facilitated by China, and about how to go about producing a plan for Middle East nuclear weapon-free zone. And this could then be at the NPT 26 as a proposal from the region. Thank you.
Okay. That's a fourth one. I will. Many.
Carlo Trezza from the NATO Defense College Foundation. I have another suggestion to the various formula. Why not consider a direct negotiation between Israel and Iran? I know that it seems impossible, but after all, there are so many tentatives which have taken place, ad hoc, multilateral. They all have been experimented and with no success. So why not consider also this, which can look as utopistic, but after all, it is also a possibility. Thank you.
Okay. I think many questions were for you, so I will give you the floor first.
Okay, thank you for a very interesting question. As I presented in my lecture, both countries, Iran and Israel, do not believe and do not agree on the solution of two-state solution. The problem is not Iran. The main problem is Israel, which clearly and officially they said that we are not agree with two-state solution. But there is a UN resolution for that, and there is aim for that. The technical problem is that the way that they define the two state is completely different from what Palestinians want. The Palestinians want a full state. What Israeli side declared that is a kind of a state without army, without any connectivity between parts. It's semi-country. It's semi-country do not lead to the conclusion. So the first problem is that Israel do not agree to the UN resolution for the two-state solution. The second part is Iran. I think in my lecture, we should, international community should push for Iran and Israel together pressure to accept that. And this is one idea. Another idea, which is, I think, which is more realistic and reasonable, is to have one state with full rights for all of the humans, secular government, which includes Muslims and Jewish and all of the nations together without any perspective of the ideological perspective. Why it is impossible? This land for the centuries was governed by the secular government, and Muslim and Jewish were lived together for centuries. Why we think that it is impossible? It is my opinion about that. About the direct connection between Iran and Israel, I think it cannot work because they are not ready in both governmental level. And for example, the Saudi side or even the Arab League have some kind of direct connection toward Israel, but anything solved? No. The answer is no. What is problem is that, in my beliefs, Israeli side think that they have a hegemony and they have ability to overcome all of the problems, and there is no right for Palestinian side. If direct connection and negotiation works, direct connection and negotiation between Saudi Arabia, especially in the period of the MBZ, can work toward Israel, but you can see that even Saudi Arabia stopped negotiation. Why? The answer is that Israel feels that they are in power level and they are in hegemon side, so there is no need to talk and no need to give the Palestinians their normal rights. Thank you.
Karim, some of the questions were you about the zone and other.
Thank you. To Professor Zanders, thank you for a very pertinent, insightful question about the other categories of weapons of mass destruction in relation to the zone. So this gets back to the particular circumstances of the evolution of the zone concept. I mean, as I'm sure many here know, this started in the 70s as a traditional nuclear weapons-free zone. And then it was expanded by the Egyptian initiative in the early 1990s to include all weapons of mass destruction and eventually their delivery systems. And the impetus for that, for expanding the scope to include everything, was as a confidence-building gesture towards Israel. So we're not just talking about Israel's nuclear weapons, we are talking about all categories of WMD that could potentially pose a threat to Israel if it disarms from its military nuclear capability. But of course, maybe the unintended consequence of this was that it was done in a way that was not very well thought through. So this, we're talking about 1990, 1991, 1992, before the treaty regimes were fully formed. I mean, especially with chemical weapons. So this was before the CWC, the establishment of the OPCW. So when Egypt presented this proposal, nobody really sat down and thought through, how would this work in terms of actual arrangements in the region, treaty commitments, prohibitions, obligations, verification, all these things. So we as a community are left with that challenge. But I think your suggestion of reaching out to the community of experts who are involved with the BWC or the OPCW is an excellent suggestion. I'm not fully aware of how the negotiating process with the zone under UN auspices, the conference process, Chen, you can enlighten us if they are already doing this or not. I assume they may be, but it gets to a very key point with regards to the design of the zone framework. Elizabeth, your point about political will, yes. There's no silver bullet to this problem. One hopes that this looming horizon of a nuclear Middle East will spur political will incentivize political will, because I don't think that is a world in which we would like to live in. It will not be confined only to the Middle East. As I think I tried to explain, this has global spillover effects with very dire, potentially dire implications for the global regime. But that leaves us with two choices: either to do nothing and wait for everyone to come on board, or to try and put in place the building blocks of a process, right, and a framework that hopefully people can join later when there is political will. And so now I think countries of the region are proceeding on that second track, hoping to put together a treaty framework that will eventually gain acceptance and when there is political will. Because there's really much less time than we think. Just a general comment about the many ideas for initiating negotiating tracks, I think these are all very important. I think we have to, again, stepping back, looking at the region as a whole, the region now is, there are so many interlocking, intersecting vectors of conflict that we need many processes for the Middle East. I mean, we need a process on ceasefires, an immediate process. We need, clearly, a process on deconfliction. We need processes on political rapprochement, such as what happened between Iran and Saudi Arabia. We definitely need conflict resolution processes to settle the conflicts, Palestine being foremost, but a resolution process for Lebanon, for Yemen, for Syria, which is a forgotten conflict. But lingering in the background of all this is the question of armaments. And that is a very pressing challenge for the region. We need a region-wide process for this challenge of WMD in the region. If we don't have that, my worry is ad hoc approaches will not work. So just trying to solve the problem in a sub-regional framework, I think today is much more challenging than it may have been 20 years ago. So if we have a zone for the Gulf region, for example, that will still leave this issue of asymmetries between Gulf states and Iran and Israel. So I think we need a region-wide process to deal with this. So ideally, we would have interlocking processes that reinforce each other. So the short answer is we have a lot of work to do. And we need these parallel interlocking processes. Thank you.
Thank you. So just to know, John Pascal, for your question regard to BW, CW, and informing the zone process. So the OPCW and the BWC ISU are the observer in the conference. They are participating in all the sessions as observers. They present, or they can present working papers, and they have been in the past. They made statements every plenary. And they also are in the working group invited experts from the BW and CW community to come and give a presentation to the working committee sessions. So there is some interaction. I think your question about why not the Middle Eastern reaching out to those communities in more broader is a valid one, and should be thought through and a little bit more maybe formalized or have more connection between the going back and forth between the communities. I don't know if you want to answer any of the questions.
Just maybe to add on this issue which was in the room, I think, about the initiative or more initiative from the region. And I think here, just an observation, we see I think we can identify a significant difference from the end of the first Trump administration, when the attitude was very much hostile to Iran from countries in the region. Now there's a much more conducive environment. So I think this will be very interesting to see how countries in the region will position themselves in the expected efforts of the Trump administration to put maximum pressure, while they want to have some more, détente relations with Iran. And maybe this could really lead to some of the initiatives which were mentioned earlier, that there could be something. I was very modest in saying something small as a starting point. Karim was far more ambitious by saying there should be a full arms control framework. But I think it's maybe for the region to take the initiative. I don't think if the region steps forward with something concrete, it will be very difficult for the US to object or to obstruct to this. But that's only the best guess I can make at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me take several from the right side, and then I will turn back to the left side. Sidki, and then we'll turn to several others. You can. From it's a question going primarily to Mr. Safavi, but I would also appreciate comments by other speakers if they wanted. It's about the ballistic missile-based strategy of Iran. On the basis of what we have seen so far during 2024, how critical a role you expect ballistic missiles to play in Iran's strategy, given, in my opinion, to a great extent, the failure of those weapons, at least not up to the expectations of many observers. And in this respect, three options I want you
to consider. Perhaps you will come up with more. Number one, business as usual. Continue investing and increasing the quality and quantity of missile inventory as well as drones and cruise missiles and all that. Number two is to look for other alternatives. Well, the obvious alternative of great concern for everybody has been already covered in the international fora. And the third one is perhaps use the concern about Iran's missile inventory as a leverage to start some kind of arms control with the neighbors and other regional states. How would you comment about those alternatives? Thank you.
Thank you. There's a lady in the back, or we can have the gentleman here and then lady with the green jacket at the back.
Hello, this is Yorgos Leventis. I'm the founder and director of International Security Forum in Lefkosia, Cyprus, and with an office also in Athens, Greece. First of all, I would like to commend the Professor Ambassador Karim Hakak about his idea for a comprehensive arms control regime in the Middle East, and I would say that we need in the region a comprehensive security architecture. And if I may key in another factor, the Eastern Mediterranean basin is sitting on hydrocarbon reserves, and we have increasing conflicts about the exclusive economic zones. And that's a project, the comprehensive security architecture in Eastern Mediterranean, Middle East is a project on which I work on sporadically for the last 20 years or so, starting with my stint at the United Nations University headquarters in Tokyo. Now, I have a couple of questions. The first one concerns the Turkish nuclear program. Which has started a few years back, and I would like to ask Mr. Stefan Clement, as a special envoy, External European Action Service, whether they are monitoring the program. A few years back, my colleague Mustafa Kibaroglu in this forum informed that the Turkish nuclear program is totally Russian-owned by Rosatom. But in the meantime, we heard President of Turkey, Erdogan, alluding to Turkey being one of the G20 countries to become a nuclear state. My second question regards the British bases in my little bedeviled island of Cyprus. In the 1970s, we do know that the UK kept nuclear warheads, and I wonder if you have any information whether these nuclear warheads are back, provided that we have an escalation in the conflicts, and definitely the Royal Air Force is flying day in, day out sorties of surveillance and in the region. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a lady in the back, and then Ayman. We can, yeah, the lady, and then Ayman Khalil.
Thank you. Daria Delzakova. I'm a nuclear policy and non-proliferation fellow with the Royal United Services Institute based in London. Thank you all for your remarks. Really, really interesting conversation. As far as I see it, it must be sort of a two-track approach when it comes to engaging with Iran on the nuclear program. The diplomacy, I think, needs to be coupled with a credible threat of military retaliation. If that diplomacy is not accepted, the question is around how do you make that military threat actually credible? What would the United States and Israel actually be willing to engage in and support? What are the risks of broader regional escalation? How do you message that? How do you message it sensitively? So I think actually at the moment there's an interesting opportunity where we have a much more hardline administration, I guess, or much more right-wing administration coming in the US, which might be able to lend that credibility, whereas the European Union, the UK, can come in on the softer side with the diplomatic overtures, with the engagement on the diplomatic side. So you kind of have both the credibility of the diplomatic engagement and the potential economic sanctions relief, preventing snapback, et cetera, while you have that underlying credibility of the military threat. But I understand that that's perhaps one for debate. I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on that, but more specifically, I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on the sanctions aspect of it, because one thing that keeps coming up, almost regardless of who I talk to across the region or in Europe, is the continued effectiveness of additional sanctions and, more than that, increasing the compliance or strengthening the compliance and the implementation of existing sanctions. It's something that I'm not personally convinced of, particularly because we've seen the limited economic benefit that Iran received after the JCPOA once the US withdrew, the adaptation of the Iranian economy to the extensive sanctions that it's under. So I'm not super convinced on kind of where the leverage or the benefit for Iran would come from on the sanctions side. But I'm really hoping to be proven wrong. So I'm hoping, Professor Safavi in particular, if you could speak to kind of what kind of economic benefit, what kind of sanctions relief Iran expects practically to receive as part of any negotiations. And then if others on the panel could speak to a little bit on their side, both in the European Union, but also within the region, what economic incentives can practically be offered to Iran as part of any negotiations. Thank you.
Thank you, Daria. Professor Ayman Khalil. Yeah, here. One.
Thank you, Madam. My name is Ayman Khalil. I'm from the Arab Institute for Security Studies based in Amman, Jordan. Two quick comments to my friend and colleague, Ambassador Haggag. You spoke about the Iranian posture, nuclear posture. And we all know that the bulk of this posture revolves around a fatwa by the supreme leader. Fatwa is a religious ruling. It goes both ways in the Islamic Sunni thought plus the Islamic Shia thought. A few months ago, I spoke in a session with the Foreign Minister Abbas Araqchi in Tehran, where he indicated that this posture could change in spirit, but never indicated to the fact or alluded to the fact that Iran would be in the business of possessing or developing nuclear weapons. Second comment is to Special Envoy Clement. Thank you so much for the presentation. Euratom, you spoke about Euratom, the possibility of application in the Middle East, and here I have to draw your attention to an important initiative launched by the League of Arab States under the so-called umbrella of the Wise Men Committee, which I was also a member of. And then the committee basically came to the conclusion that cooperation in regional nuclear fuel cycle activities should go ahead and pursued commonly. And basically they were alluding repeatedly to Euratom as a positive model that could be employed within the Middle East. And second comment for Special Envoy Clement, the risk of proliferation is the title of this session, and the EU has significantly invested in a project that fits exactly with the title of this session, the Zone project. Initially, 2 million or 3 million euros were injected into that project, and second stage witnessed another 2 million euros. My question is, to what extent have this EU-sponsored project was able to reach tangible results? And has it been able to improve the situation? And when I speak about tangible results, I'm not talking about literature or adding to the wealth of existing literature. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ayman. So let me open it. There was a question about ballistic missiles, sanctions, Turkey nuclear program, British bases, fatwa, and the UNIDIR zone project. So I will open it for anyone to grab.
Thank you again. So when we talk about the Iranian missiles, including ballistic and others, missiles. We should remember that Iran experienced the longest war in the previous century, war between Iran, 8 years war between Iran and Iraq was the longest fight of the century, previous century. In that period of time, Iran was begging to other countries, including West and East, to have weapons, and all of the parties rejected Iranians' demands to have ordinary weapons. And after that, Iran started to build some kind of internal capability to make the weapons to defense. And in that period of time, Iran find that Iran is alone and nobody is helping Iran in the situation after the revolution. And after that, Iran sees that their neighbors, including Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and somehow Israel, and even Pakistan, two of them are they are having atomic bomb, Pakistan and Israel. Turkey is a member of the NATO, with full support from all of the countries of the NATO. And Arabistan, which is an alliance of the USA. So in this geopolitical situation, there is no left for Iran to make a kind of difference and balance of power. The only solution they find is ballistic missiles and the drones and other capability of the missiles to maintaining their security and to answer to their vital concernation of existence. So what is for future? For future, I think it depends on especially European countries. If they want to activate a snapback in the JCPOA, I think Iran will definitely withdraw from the NPT, and the reaction is that they will extend their missiles, especially the progressive missiles, which was limited to 2,000 kilometers before. They will extend it for 3,000 or 4,000 in less than 1 year after the snapback from the European countries. And this is their reaction. Another things and another aims for Iranian to build these missiles and the weapons is for financial aids, for financial reasons. As you know, the trading of military is a huge amount of money around the world, which Turkey nowadays are beneficial from this part of the industrial works. Iran has just oil, and in previous time they have pistachio and carpets. Nowadays they have something which is more worse than pistachio, carpets, and even oil. This is the weapons, because they know how to do it, to make it, and it's cheaper than the other countries, and it can work, and it proves that it can work in the battlefield. So they have some idea about how they can improve their economical situation by exporting these weapons to other countries in the middle class weapons for drones and missiles. About what can do for the sanctions, I think Iran feel that they have been betrayed by European countries and USA too, because European countries, they said that and they declared that we do not betray you. We are unable to help you when the USAs are changing their position and making the maximum pressure strategy against you. The question from the Iranian side is that are you wasting our time? If you have no position to help Iran, why did you start negotiation with Iran when you have no position to make your promises and to make the JCPOA exist? So after that, Iran believes that there is no hope from European countries, and they are disappointed from the European countries. And nowadays, we see that even in some issues, European countries are more harsh than even USA. So the situation is not good. What I feel is that we should make a bridge and reconstruct the relation between Iran and the EU, which is the real need for both sides. In the period of the Mr. Raisi, I was engaged for the government to persuade them, to make them convinced that we should repair our relation to the European side, but the president of the Raisi was not agreeing on the idea. Everything is changed. In the period of the Mr. Pezeshkian, no, they are agreed to start. But the problem is that from where and how they can reconstruct it. This is something that I'm eager to hear from the professors and experts like you. And if you have suggestions, you can tell me during this panel or after the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. I will turn to Stefan for answers, and then I will try to leave a little bit time that we have. We have less than 10 minutes, or actually less than 3 minutes now, but I think given the fact that you made all the way from New York, I would like to give you, but just a second, Ambassador Clement, please answer.
Thank you. Just to maybe quickly on 2 or 3 issues, and some issues I will handle bilaterally maybe in the break. On the sanctions complex, which was raised from the audience, but also here, I mean, it is, at least from a European perspective, we made a tremendous effort in 2018 to keep things running. At the end, even with all our efforts, since we have a kind of a market economy, economic actors, they make decisions based on risk, and they just in the facing this very severe and strong US secondary sanctions, or economic actors did not take the initiative anymore to engage with Iran in spite of all our efforts. Secondly, and this is more to the question from the audience, in looking to the future, if we consider some potential negotiations and agreement, I think it will be very, sanctions lifting for sure will play a role in this. The US, they, from my perspective, may be able to lift some or maybe all of the secondary sanctions, but this as such will not provide any concrete benefit for Iran. So the benefit, the concrete economic return will come from European countries, will come from other countries. So I think this has to be factored in, and this gives the EU a role in this exercise. To the question of Euratom multinational fuel cycle, I think it is very relevant to pursue this project. I mean, EU has a multinational nuclear industry, and this can create some level of confidence, at least between actors, if this very sensitive part of the nuclear programs are under common oversight, transparency. There's maybe some more exchange of information between participants, so this can act at least. Of course, it will not totally prevent proliferation or breakout. It can act as some kind of raising the exit cost if someone doesn't play the game, if I may say so. Quickly on the WMD free zone, the EU has always been committed and remains committed to the issue of the WMD free zone to the Middle East. We continue to support this. You are asking about the concrete outcome. I think it's very, how to say, unrealistic to expect some very concrete outcome at the moment. What is important, I think, to keep awareness, to raise awareness, and also to keep the knowledge, to preserve the knowledge, to basically attract the attention of younger diplomats, to train young diplomats on this issue, because this is an issue which is often very much carried forward by older and experienced people. So I think the EU will continue to invest in this project, and we have developed some innovative products. I may take the break to answer the Turkish question, and I, of course, will not answer the question on the British basis for two reasons. It's a defense issue, and we had Brexit, so thank you very much.
Thank you. So with that, we are very pleased to have His Excellency Sidi Mohammed Laktaf. He is the president of the 5th session of the Weapon of Mass Destruction Free Zone Conference, as well as the permanent representative of Mauritania to the UN. His Excellency. It's over.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I would like to apologize for being a little bit late. I get sick in the morning and I went to the hospital. That's why I'm late. I would like to begin by thanking the European Union Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Consortium for inviting me in my capacity as the chair of the 5th session of the establishment of Middle East Zone of Free of Nuclear Weapon and other mass of destruction to participate in this important event. My intervention will focus on 2 points. The first one is general and deals with the progress the conference that made so far and its prospects. While the second point, I will try to briefly shed light on the challenges and the risk of proliferation of nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction in Middle East. Speaking of the prospect of the conference, it is worth highlighting the progress that has been in recent years. Significantly, we had a standing conference that is convened on an annual basis to debate and deliberate on the elaboration of legally binding treaty establishing a Middle East zone free of nuclear weapons and other mass of destruction, accordingly in accordance with the General Assembly decision, idea towards which some key players in the Middle East are still reluctant despite its legitimacy and its normal demand. The continuing deliberation of the conference resulted in significant procedural and substantive progress. The conference adopted its own role of procedure and created a working committee for an intersession period addressing a substantive issue related to nuclear weapons. At the same time, such substantive deliberation and engagement of the state party in the process provide that there is a political will and a spirit of cooperation to reach a goal of Middle East zone free of nuclear weapon and weapon of mass destruction. However, the continued absence of Israel and the reluctance and non-engagement of some key players, particularly those who conspired the 1995 resolution, are challenging, fact that they need to be addressed by the international community. Such challenges as undermining the process, but they should not prevent us from continuing to move forward slowly but with some progress. All in all, the conference should and will continue to deliver his mandate, promote and advocate for the idea and prepare for the elaboration of the nuclear weapon free zone in accordance with his mandate. However, the situation in the Middle East and the international context are challenging indeed. You recall all the failure of the two review conferences on the NPT on the 10th and the 9th and 10th respectively in 2015 and 2022 in reaching agreement on substantive conclusion and recommendation, which was disappointing and come to exasperate and slow down the effort to nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. The situation in Middle East has changed since October 2023 and keep deteriorating, bearing in mind that even in the period of no war and no peace, the Middle East actors did not share the same view when it's come to the establishment of zone free of WMD, and some like Israel has never stepped in. It is obvious now that the Middle East will never back to the pre-October 2023 period as the endless war on Gaza and recently Lebanon get worse and worse and worse, rhetoric and dominating the sphere. The focus now is on how to end the war and enact a permanent ceasefire to allow the construction and the return of displaced personnel. But the ramification of this war will last for a long time, and then will be a need for a durable peace to enable any significant move in the process of establishing a Middle East free zone of nuclear weapon and other mass of destruction. The history of the Middle East region, which has been marked by consecutive war and the multiplicity of actors, have not led to the implementation of the two-state solution advocated and which benefit from the support of the international community. This situation remains a factor of instability which could lead to a resurgence of nuclear proliferation in the region. In conclusion, the region of Middle East is very sensitive and remains vulnerable to any increased hostility that could lead to the use of unconventional arsenal. It is therefore imperative that the international community put pressure on the key players and also make effort aimed at encouraging all countries in the region to be part of a zone free of nuclear weapon and weapon of destruction, following the example for other regions around the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. If there is any specific question to the Ambassador, I will be willing to take them. If not, I will just ask you, Ambassador, given the fact that, and we all congratulate you as well as wishing you best of luck as we become for the 5th session that will come in 2 weeks from now in New York, what we should expect from the session, and because many people here are looking on those issues of weapon of mass destruction free zone in the Middle East for many years. So what, if you can just summarize for us what was achieved so far in the last 4 sessions and what we should expect from the 5th one?
Thank you. During the last 4 sessions and the next one, there is an important thing that we gather together in the spirit of to have a legal binding treaty on the nuclear weapon. Of course, we need all the parties to be part. Unfortunately, the seats of Israel is still empty. We want Israel to be part of the process, and the decisions are taken by consensus. We need to have all the parties in the process because it is collective responsibility. We need to work together in order to have the reduction of nuclear weapon and not to have a threat in the region. The region is very sensitive, as I have mentioned already. We need all parts to be part on the process. We didn't have something on the concrete that has been already done by the conference, but the spirit and the willpower of all parties to engage and to continue on this process are the main purpose. We work on the technical aspects, particularly the nuclear piece of ease of nuclear weapon. We work on the verification, on the confidence building. All these aspects are among the working committee, and we're still working on, and we're still waiting for Israel to be part of the process. Thank you.
Thank you. And I can tell you also that this room is full of people that are interested in the topic and willing to give advice and support the process. So with that, please join me in congratulating the speakers and thanking them.